Imagine a luxury cruise ship calmly sailing through dangerous waters, an area known as the deadliest shark territory. Around this shipping route, there is a mysterious sand island that only appears when the tide goes out, then disappears again when the tide comes in. In the middle of what looks like a perfect vacation, not a single passenger realizes that this beautiful journey will turn into a nightmare. A small act of greed, one fatal mistake, and a reckless decision by several crew members slowly drag a woman into a fight for life and death. Trapped on a sand island that is slowly sinking, surrounded by bloodthirsty sharks, she must survive with injuries, fear, and time that keeps running out. This is a story about betrayal, sacrifice, and the struggle to survive in a merciless ocean. The story begins on a super luxury cruise ship traveling through waters known as a shark habitat. In the same area, there is also a small, mysterious island that is only visible at low tide and disappears when the tide rises. While the passengers enjoy their vacation happily, without realizing it, great danger is lurking. In one of the cabins, a mother and her child are getting ready to leave the room. This moment does not escape the attention of a group of mischievous crew members who have been waiting for an opportunity.
Gonna run down and...
I don't owe you, dude.
The child is Kendall, a teenage girl going through a rebellious phase and feeling annoyed because she has to attend dinner with her future stepfather. Her mother keeps trying to persuade Kendall, explaining that her boyfriend is a ship captain, the same profession as Kendall's late father. However, the wound from losing her father just 6 months ago makes it hard for Kendall to accept this reality.
You need to move in fast, honey, you needed to focus on graduate. The captain's your father's.
Have fun with the captain.
Their departure is quickly taken advantage of by Oscar and George to steal from Kendall's room. Before starting, Oscar first tells his younger brother, Brian, to go downstairs to get something. It turns out this theft also involves another crew member as part of their group. Once they feel the situation is safe, they begin ransacking the room. Meanwhile, Kendall and her mother get into an argument before meeting the captain. Kendall gets angry after finding out that her mother, without her knowledge, sold a cabin on the garden property left behind by her father. The reason is to make a living, but to Kendall, it feels like a betrayal, especially since the grief over her father's death is still very fresh. On the other hand, Oscar and George are disappointed because they don't find anything valuable, only trivial items. Not long after, Brian returns and immediately gets angry when he sees his brother stealing. Brian is upset because he has worked hard helping Oscar as a crew member, only to be used for criminal actions. Suddenly, Kendall approaches them. George starts to panic, afraid that Kendall will report them. Oscar and Brian pressure George to release Kendall immediately before the situation gets worse. However, George's panic only makes things more chaotic, causing Kendall and Brian to both fall into the sea. Bad luck awaits them, because those waters are controlled by a pack of vicious sharks. Without explaining what actually happened, Oscar tells Cyrus to delete the CCTV footage around Kendall's room. At the same time, George begins to realize that the sharks are already moving closer toward them. Meanwhile, Molly has no idea that her child is now in serious danger. The captain is also confused when he sees Molly arriving alone, since Molly planned to introduce Kendall to him that night. Molly asks the captain to wait and returns to the cabin to look for her child. Of course, Molly doesn't find Kendall there. The tension rises when Molly questions Oscar about Kendall's whereabouts.
Can you help me find my daughter?
Yeah.
Oscar pretends not to know, but Molly forces him to help with the search. Out in the open sea, Brian, who turns out to still be alive, sees sharks circling around him and Kendall. Bravely, Brian tries to distract one of the sharks that is targeting Kendall's leg. Kendall encourages Brian, who is willing to risk his life for her safety. Even though he is injured by a shark bite, Brian keeps trying to survive. Now it's Kendall's turn to help Brian, even though her own leg is injured from falling off the ship.
I can't make it!
In the end, the two of them manage to reach and become stranded on a small island that appears in the middle of the sea. In their injured condition, Kendall and Brian become two people trapped on that island, surrounded by the ocean and sharks ready to attack at any moment. Meanwhile, Molly grows more desperate searching for her child. Oscar then suggests that they inform the captain so he can use the ship's loudspeaker to help with the search. However, before that, Oscar asks for Molly's passenger card under the excuse of formalities.
Wait, I'm coming.
Okay? I'll be right back. We need it to file a form in your room if you look for it.
Molly's suspicion arises when the door is suddenly locked from the inside, and Oscar can't explain why. Luckily, Molly is a former Navy member, so Oscar is unable to fight back. In the end, Oscar admits what actually happened to Kendall.
Sorry.
Why did
The military!
we need to go tell the
On the other hand, Brian explains to Kendall that he was actually trying to save her from Oscar and George's evil actions. Even though Kendall finds it hard to believe at first, Brian chooses to focus on securing Kendall's broken leg. Unfortunately, the sharks are still patiently waiting around the island. The situation becomes even more terrifying when Brian realizes that this small island only appears when the tide is low and will sink when the tide comes in. The entire crew panics after learning what happened to Kendall. The captain is furious and blames Cyrus for not sounding the emergency alarm immediately. In the middle of his anger, Molly begs to be allowed to take part in the search. Oscar is forbidden from joining. Besides being involved in the theft, he also has to take responsibility for his actions. After Oscar is secured, the captain orders Cyrus to immediately contact the Coast Guard. There is nothing they can do except wait for help to arrive. Even on that stretch of Sand Island, Kendall and Brian have no place to even take shelter from the scorching sun. On the other hand, Oscar forces Cyrus to let him join the search mission. Even though he has done wrong, Oscar is deeply worried about Brian's condition, someone who has meant a lot in his life. From Cyrus, Oscar eventually gains access to the equipment room, allowing him to sneak in and disguise himself as part of the rescue team. Meanwhile, the tension on the island keeps rising when a large shark nearly bites part of Kendall's body. The situation gets even worse as Kendall's leg starts to swell badly. With limited equipment, Brian ties Kendall's leg using shoelaces, hoping the injury won't get any worse. Brian's attention and care slowly make Kendall realize that this man truly has a sincere heart.
Scrounge up something off this island.
Hey. But can't.
On the other side, Molly, who is experienced in leading search missions, keeps moving without realizing that one of the crew members on the rescue boat is Oscar, the person involved in the incident that injured her child. Back on the Sand Island, Brian finds two small toys that can at least distract the sharks. However, Kendall thinks it would be more useful if they use the shells around them to catch fish. Without wasting time, Brian immediately puts together a simple fishing tool using Kendall's glasses. They are confused by the shark's behavior, which looks extremely aggressive, as if they are deliberately hunting the humans on the island.
Don't mention it.
At the same time, the rescue team begins entering waters controlled by a pack of sharks. Suddenly, a surprise attack causes their GPS transmitter to fall into the sea. Panic breaks out, especially since the earlier impact caused their speedboat to start leaking. In that critical situation, a male crew member recklessly tries to patch the speedboat even though he has to swim in the dangerous waters. However, blood from his wound instead attracts the attention of the largest shark around them. The shark is covered in old scars, clear proof of brutal encounters in the past. After explaining the situation they are facing, Molly starts to wonder why the Coast Guard hasn't shown up yet. Even worse, their position has now completely disappeared from the radar because the tracking device has sunk. The rescue crew actually manages to finish the repair and is about to get back onto the speedboat. But suddenly, hysterical screams are heard when everyone realizes that the male crew member has fallen victim to the shark's brutality.
Come back.
At the same time, Molly starts to get annoyed when she realizes that the masked man secretly helping is not an official member, but Oscar, who managed to sneak in. Even so, since it has already happened, Molly forces Oscar to actually be useful in this rescue mission.
We don't have the nav.
Mr. Parker, the bridge is yours. Tell us.
As the cold night approaches, Brian tries to gather various items from the shoreline to start a fire. Meanwhile, Kendall just sits there in silence, feeling like she can't do much anymore. Kendall begins to show signs of severe dehydration. All this pressure nearly makes Brian lose control of his emotions. Brian vents his anger at the ocean and the lurking sharks, but because he pushes himself too hard, Brian forgets about the wound on his leg, which which reopens and starts bleeding again. On the cruise ship, Cyrus reports that the Coast Guard will need several more hours to reach Molly's last known location. Meanwhile, on the speedboat, Molly can't continue the journey without a compass or GPS. When asking for advice over the radio, the captain suggests using the stars to determine the direction west. Unfortunately, the sky covered with clouds makes that method impossible.
Cloud cover. Can't even see a single. We know where we're going.
On the sand island, Brian grows more desperate after failing to start a fire with the limited resources they have. Things get worse when Kendall faints again due to worsening dehydration. They are forced to endure the darkness and cold, with the sky still covered in clouds. Until finally, Oscar remembers that the night before, the moon was in the south. Using that clue, Molly is finally able to estimate the westward direction they need. They immediately continue the journey while updating the captain. On the other hand, on the sand island that is slowly sinking, Brian continues to stay by Kendall's side. The rising tide now makes it easier for the sharks to move closer and attack. Meanwhile, on the speedboat, Molly tries to calm Oscar, who is extremely terrified. She tells him not to move too much, not even his soaking wet body.
You came out to save them? They need to focus on Kendall.
What are we gonna do?
Gotta wait for them to move away.
After being unconscious for about half an hour, Kendall finally wakes up. She then realizes that the island they are on has shrunk even more due to the rising tide. Brian gives her a rock as a makeshift weapon in case the sharks attack again. On the cruise ship, Cyrus secretly plans to escape before her conspiracy with George is exposed. She doesn't contact the Coast Guard at all, as ordered by the captain. In the middle of the chaos, when the sharks seem to move away for a moment, Molly takes the opportunity to flip their overturned boat back over. Unnoticed, one shark slowly approaches them again. After all the rope preparations are done, they get ready to pull the boat together. Flipping the boat is clearly not easy, especially with rough seas and constant danger. However, after an exhausting struggle, the mission to flip the boat finally succeeds. Without wasting time, they immediately continue their journey. Unfortunately, in the middle of the rescue effort, Oscar finally becomes a victim of the shark's brutality.
I wish Abby made it too.
Despite losing one person, Molly has no choice but to continue the mission to find her child. Meanwhile, the captain begins to grow suspicious because Cyrus still doesn't respond to his calls. In fact, Cyrus is overwhelmed with anxiety because there has been no news at all from the Coast Guard. While Cyrus pretends to look for her crewmates, the captain finally contacts the Coast Guard directly. From this, the captain learns a shocking fact. From the very beginning, Cyrus never contacted the Coast Guard to ask for help. Back on the sand island, the tide keeps rising until the remaining land is now only about the size of a volleyball court. The crashing waves no longer look beautiful, but instead feel like a sign that death is getting closer. Kendall faints again just as the seawater moves even closer. Not long after, a Coast Guard helicopter passes over them, but fails to spot the island due to the dark, overcast weather. At that critical moment, Molly on the speedboat finally sees a break in the clouds revealing the guiding stars. Using that clue, Molly manages to determine the westward direction they have been searching for to find the island where her child is trapped. Meanwhile, on the sand island that is almost completely submerged, Brian begins to lose hope. He can only sit there in despair, crying, feeling like there is nothing more he can do. On the cruise ship, the captain contacts Cyrus again and demands accountability for all the violations that have caused many deaths. The captain also states that sooner or later the Coast Guard will definitely find Cyrus. Realizing her actions have been exposed, Cyrus recklessly swims away from the ship before the Coast Guard helicopter can monitor her escape. The trouble isn't over for Molly. The speedboat Molly is riding suddenly breaks down, even though she's already quite close to the location where Kendall is believed to be. At the same time, Brian keeps praying while surrounded by sharks that appear increasingly aggressive.
We were so close! We were so close! Oh no, no! Somebody
Luckily, Brian manages to dodge and immediately save Kendall, who is almost completely submerged. However, the sharks continue circling them, as if they are not yet ready to finish off their prey. Attack after attack makes Molly even more worried about Kendall's condition, which is becoming more critical. The situation gets worse with the news that the Coast Guard helicopter has to return to base first to refuel.
And then to continue after the pad is completely
Refueling inbound.
Kendall herself starts to give up, thinking that her life might end in a shark's jaws. In those critical moments, her thoughts drift to her mother, remembering all the arguments they've been having lately. When Kendall is dragged back underwater by a shark, Molly arrives just in time. Without hesitation, Molly immediately goes after her and tries to free Kendall, who is still stuck in the shark's jaws. Using all her strength, Molly finally manages to save her daughter. They quickly move away, even though they have to row the boat using only their hands. However, the shark has no intention of letting them go so easily. In the end, the heavily scarred shark is finally stopped after being hit by flames from the flare gun Molly is carrying. Unfortunately, a new problem appears as Kendall keeps losing a lot of blood from her wounds. At that critical moment, the SAR team finally arrives. They always seem to show up at the last moment, but with the help of a helicopter, they're able to bring Kendall and Molly back to the ship without having to row again through water still filled with sharks.
Until I know.
He was the hero.
After everything is safe, Brian apologizes to Kendall for what his brother Oscar did, which dragged them into this nightmare. Meanwhile, Kendall sincerely thanks Brian because when she was in danger, Brian was always there, helping her, and even sacrificing himself for her safety. Their struggle becomes the beginning for Brian to earn Molly's approval, as she slowly starts to feel the bond growing between the two of them, after going through an ordeal that nearly took their lives.